We are working with the government, with our partners, including with Canadian government, and we are delivering message that we need artillery shells, we need air defense, we need armored vehicles. We are working towards this progress, and we hope that there will be more support.
That was Yulia Kovalyev, Ukrainian ambassador to Canada, earlier in the show, speaking about the 2-year anniversary of the war. As we mentioned earlier in the show, Canada has imposed a fresh round of sanctions on Russia aimed at cutting off funding for Putin's war machine. But should Canada be doing more? And can we prevent war fatigue that seems to be taking hold in different countries? Let's bring back the front bench panel. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, Gurtan Singh, you're all back here. Appreciate that. Melanie, let's start with you. Since 2014, when Crimea was first annexed by Russia, Canada has sanctioned 2,900 individuals and entities in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova, all people who are connected to the violation of Ukraine's sovereignty. Despite that, Putin's war is still being waged. Should we be going further here?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we should go further with sanctions. But I think more importantly, the Ukrainian government has been very clear about what they need from us, and that's ammunition. And they need money for ammunition. We're actually a manufacturing country for ammunition, and there's no reason why we can't ramp up production to help our ally out, to help NATO out in this regard. The European Union has been falling short by about 50% on their commitments to get ammunition and other arms to Ukraine to help them. And Canada's been falling short for all of our commitments on spending. I think that we've only met about 50% of them. So any new spending to Ukraine at this point needs to be targeted and specific for what it is that they actually need, which is the ammunition needed to continue fighting this war. They're being outshot 10-1 right now by Russia, and that is not sustainable.
Yeah, and Sabrina, they're rationing ammunitions. And at the same time, this week, we heard Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, calling out Canada, saying that they expect a plan going forward for any NATO member country that doesn't have a plan to get to that 2%. Canada's out about 1.38% of GDP spending on defense. And then you had the American ambassador to NATO really come forward and say that Canada basically isn't pulling its weight. How much pressure is going to be on this government now going forward when it says that it's an ally of the Ukrainians and of Volodymyr Zelensky, saying we stand with you, but there has been this open criticism of the spending on defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly Canada has done a very good job of supporting both Ukraine through funding and also ensuring that they are sanctioning on the other side to cut off supply for the Russians. And I think we heard from Bill Blair, perhaps it was last week or the week before, talking about getting to that 2% of spending that NATO requires. I think that there needs to be kind of an unwavering show of support for Ukraine across all three parties, across all parliamentarians in Canada, to make sure that as you see that decline of support and that kind of like question on whether or not Canadians still want to be sending money, that there's really no parliamentarian that they can look to in the House and say like, oh, that person doesn't support this effort. So I think that that definitely has to be part of this goal. But I do think that Canada has a bit of room to grow in terms of its support for NATO, and I think that they have committed to that, and they have committed to increasing their funding and their support. And we saw that this week as they, did another round of ammunitions funding. So.
Yeah, Gurtan, do you think that it needs to ramp up all the more now when you consider that we are getting into this, we are in this anniversary now, 2 years, we're going to be going into year 3 of this war. Does Canada really need to step up even more so now?
Well, let's look at how Putin and Russia is acting right now. Just last week, we saw, which is undoubtedly the death of Navalny, which was done, undoubtedly at the hands of Putin. An opposition leader. He is a dictator. He is someone who is wreaking havoc across Europe and causing immense amounts of pain. And he's a destabilizing force. He's someone who is a threat to democracy, and he's someone who's a threat to all of us. And I think that's what we need to understand in Canada, that the this battle right now in defense of Ukraine truly has a lot at risk, and it impacts us. It impacts food prices. It impacts overall global stability. It impacts oil and more. Like, this is something that impacts each and every one of us. And when there is this kind of fatigue, we need to remind Canadians that we don't have the privilege of saying this is not in our backyard, it doesn't matter. This impacts anyone who upholds democracy, and it's incumbent that we are unequivocal in our support in this battle against Russia and Putin.
Melanie, despite that, there's a number of surveys out there gauging how ordinary Canadians feel about the war and their level of support. And one Leger marketing poll shows that support has grown, while there's another one by Spark Advocacy showing that public enthusiasm, I should say, for Canada's contribution could be slipping. So how do politicians continue to make the case for the war and ensure that that support is enduring?
So you just witnessed this panel agree to a Team Canada approach on Ukraine.
You know what? Let's just shut it down now, Melanie. That's it.
Yeah,
you know what? We're not going to get any better than
agreed.
this. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
So that's what we need our politicians to do as well. I think when it comes to Ukraine, that the politicking needs to be put aside, and we need a Team Canada approach of all of the political parties and their leaders supporting this. I know that for the Conservatives, that there will be MPs out across the country this weekend at the pro-Ukrainian rallies, recognizing the 2-year anniversary. They're taking place in cities across the country, and there will be Conservative MPs at all of them. And I think that's a great show of support. And I hope that that the Liberals will, make an announcement soon about additional funding and support for Ukraine, and specifically to help ensure that they are getting the ammunition they need to keep fighting this war.
Sabrina, do you think that it only behooves Liberals to say, you know what, let's take a Team Canada approach to this as well, in the same way that through the beginning of the COVID pandemic, that a lot of people said, you know what, let's put partisanship aside? Do you think that this is another one of those? Because we have heard not only from the Ukrainian ambassador to Canada, Yulia Kovalev, but also Volodymyr Zelensky, essentially, making the case that Ukraine is the shield for the Western world against Russia. And if Ukraine falls, then NATO countries are next.
Well, I certainly think that there's a lot of reason to make sure that we have a Team Canada approach. I think that's, when we talk about foreign policy and the way countries view us, they don't think about us as Liberals, Conservatives, New Democrats. They think about us as Canada. And so it's important for us to approach this like Canada. I think one of the things that we've seen in those surveys is the idea that people don't perceive that this is going to end peacefully, or that this is going to end in the next 2 years. And I think that is a question that Canada can maybe lead on with its other Western allies, either within NATO or even just within the United States, especially as you have a democratic government that you can really work with right now. Like, what is the plan, and how do you communicate that not only to Canadians, but also to Americans, where you're seeing a really reduced level of support for Ukraine? And I think understanding where the Western allies are going as a united front on this will be really important for combating a lot of that, war fatigue, as you mentioned.
Guratin, I can give you 20 seconds on that.
I would just say that as much as this panel is united, we need to recognize that we have been seeing cracks of this in the House of Commons. And I need to call out the Conservatives who voted against a free trade agreement with Ukraine, and the fact that we have that sentiment amongst their base. So, we need to really hold each other accountable on something that is beyond partisanship. And that means having the courage to say there's aspects of political parties that we disagree with. That's partisanship, I get it, but some things we need to be united on, and Ukraine is one of them.
Okay, we almost had a full panel where you all agreed. Guratin, somehow you ruined it there. I'm kidding. That's why we love the show. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Guratin